One of the things I want to do with the podcast is every now and then spend a show responding to listener questions. Well, the other week I got an email from my YouTube friend Theo, and he had a question about simultaneous causation and the role it might play in a critique of an argument for the existence of God. After thinking about it, I thought this would be a good one for a video response. So Theo writes, "For several months now, I've been arguing that simultaneous causation is impossible, or at the very least, it doesn't happen in our world. I have a refutation of the Kalam cosmological argument based on the idea that A, causation is a purely temporal phenomenon, but also that B, causes need to come before their effects rather than in the same instant as their effect. The problem that I'm having is that I'm unable to find much in the way of references or philosophical discussions on the matter of simultaneous causation on the internet. Because of this, I am finding it difficult to support my position, and yet all of my opponents whom I've argued this with don't seem to be able to back up their arguments by references either. Is there any way you can help me with this?" Well, I'm happy to try. Let's just set the context so that viewers who aren't familiar with the Kalam argument understand what the broader debate is about and why the question of simultaneous causation is relevant. So, the Kalam argument is a species of what are called cosmological arguments for the existence of God as the creator of the universe. A cosmological argument is an argument that moves from premises about the existence of the universe to the conclusion that there is a God who is the creator or sustainer of the universe. William Lane Craig is most responsible for popularizing the Kalam cosmological argument. When you see this term in print, it'll likely have his name attached to it somewhere. But he didn't originate it. It's a very old argument. The term Kalam comes from a tradition of Islamic philosophy. There's a big literature on it, but the basic argument is pretty simple. It goes like this. If something comes into existence at some finite time in the past, then its coming into existence has a cause. The universe began to exist at some finite time in the past. Therefore, the universe's coming into existence has a cause. Now, if this argument is compelling, then we can conclude that something had to cause the universe to come into existence. And rationality demands that we ask what could possibly function as a cause of the universe coming into being. Now, of course, you need additional argumentation to conclude that this something is the God of Christianity and Judaism and Islam. But this is the crucial first stage of the argument. Now, premise 2 is a relatively uncontroversial claim. It's central to the Big Bang model of cosmology, which has almost universal support among cosmologists. There is overwhelming evidence that the universe originated in a very hot, very dense state at some finite time in the past, between 13 and 14 billion years ago, and that it's been expanding and cooling ever since. The interesting premise is the first one, which states a general metaphysical principle, that if a thing comes into existence, then it must have a cause. Now here's how Theophage's refutation strategy is going to go. He wants to say that the universe's coming into existence is a special event that by its nature is going to violate this metaphysical principle. Why? Because if we follow the standard interpretation of Big Bang cosmology, the beginning of the universe also marks the beginning of time itself. It's the beginning of temporal succession. And that means that we can't talk about moments of time prior to the first moment, the moment of the universe coming into being, because there are no such moments. So Theophage wants to say that if there are no moments of time prior to the beginning of the universe, then there can be no cause of the universe's coming into being. Why? Because causation is by its nature a temporal process. Causes necessarily precede, they come before their effects. But we've just agreed that nothing can come before the universe's coming into being, since that beginning marks the first moments of time. Hence it follows that the universe's coming into being doesn't have a cause. It's an uncaused event. And the Kalam argument can't get off the ground. Okay, so what does this have to do with simultaneous causation? Well, one way that a defender of the Kalam argument can respond to this objection is to say that causation doesn't necessarily have to be a temporal process, with causes always preceding their effects. Maybe it makes sense to say that sometimes causes can occur simultaneously with their effects. So if we grant this, then the defender can say, maybe the cause of the universe's coming into being occurred simultaneously with the universe's coming into being. At that very first moment, some kind of causal power was at work that simultaneously brought the universe into existence. Now, if we grant this possibility, this takes the steam out of Theophage's objection because it gives room for God or some other causal agent to enter the picture to function as the causal explanation of the universe. So what Theophage wants to do is block this move by giving an argument against simultaneous causation. It's a long way around, but this is how I understand the motivation for Theophage's question. He wants information on the status of the concept of simultaneous causation in philosophy and in physics. Do people generally reject it? Do they accept it? What's going on? Well, I'm going to try to answer that question. But first, Theo also has a couple of arguments of his own against simultaneous causation that he wanted to run past me. So I'd like to look at these first before I forget them. Here's Theophage's first argument. Given the known laws of physics, any kind of transfer of energy, say from one ball hitting another, must take a non-zero amount of time. So for every kind of physical cause, like a ball hitting another ball, there is a necessary lag between cause and effect. Simultaneous causation is thus impossible. I like how clear this argument is. So this is how I would formalize it a bit. Premise 1, every kind of physical cause involves a transfer of energy. Premise 2, transfers of energy always take a non-zero amount of time. Therefore, every kind of physical cause takes a non-zero amount of time, which is just to say that every kind of physical cause is not simultaneous with its effect. Now, this first premise asserts something very specific about the nature of physical causation. And there are philosophers and physicists who think along these lines, but I just want to note here that this kind of physicalist analysis of causation is not the only game in town. But I'll come back to this later. My first thought is, even if we grant the two premises, I see a problem here with the relevance of the argument to the specific case in mind, namely the origin of the universe. Even if we grant that every physical cause involves a transfer of energy, there's good reason to think that whatever the nature of the causal agent is that might be responsible for the universe coming into being, it's probably not an ordinary physical cause. The cause of the universe coming into existence isn't going to be like a baseball bat hitting a baseball. So to that extent, I don't think a defender of the Kalam argument is going to find this compelling, since they're already thinking of the cause of this first event as a very special kind of cause. But Theophage has another argument against simultaneous causation. Here it is. Further, we assume that a thing cannot cause itself to come about or exist, because the thing would have to exist before it existed in order to be a cause for its existence. Included in that is the assumption that causes have to come temporally prior to their effects. Naturally, it is a logical contradiction for a thing to exist before it exists. But if simultaneous causation is allowed, then the thing does not need to exist before it exists, only simultaneously with its own existence, which by definition everything does anyway. So it would seem that if simultaneous causation is allowed, then things are also allowed to cause themselves, and yet we don't see this happening around us. Now, the first paragraph just restates the basic objection that I paraphrased earlier. It's the second paragraph that's interesting to me. What I'm getting out of these paragraphs is this argument. Premise 1. If causation can be simultaneous, then a thing can cause itself to exist simply in virtue of coexisting with itself. Premise 2. But by definition, everything coexists with itself. 3. Thus, if causation can be simultaneous, then things are allowed to cause themselves. 4. But we don't see this happening around us. Therefore, conclusion, causation cannot be simultaneous. Here I'm not as confident that I understand the reasoning or precisely what's being asserted, but assuming this is halfway accurate, here are my thoughts. It seems like you want to say that from the fact that effects can be simultaneous with their causes, it follows that things can cause themselves to exist. I just don't see how this follows. It might be true that if a thing causes itself to exist, then both the cause and effect must act simultaneously. But the converse surely doesn't follow. If both the cause and effect act simultaneously, it doesn't follow that the thing must or is able to cause itself to exist. A might imply B, but it doesn't follow that B implies A, and I think this argument relies on B implying A. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about Theophage's arguments against simultaneous causation. I don't think they win the day, but that doesn't mean that there aren't compelling arguments to be had against simultaneous causation. And that gets us to his question about the status of this concept in philosophy and physics.